Chapter 4, Old Testament 2. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about the rest of the Old Testament. It's going to be an extremely short chapter because most of the stuff that we're not going to talk about. As I said in the previous lecture, I only want to stick to the things that you need to know regarding Christianity. So in this lecture, I'm just going to point out some items or events that you should know as it pertains to Christianity. And the reason I'm doing that is because of what something Jesus said in the New Testament. If we go to the New Testament and we look into Luke's Gospel, Jesus is talking to his apostles, and he mentions that he is fulfilling what was written about him in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. So I already went over the law of Moses. I'm not going to go over all the things that are written in the prophets, and I'm certainly not going to go over the Psalms, as they're mostly just music or songs related to Jesus. In this, we just want to focus on events again that are going on in the Old Testament after those first 5 books of the Bibles. So the Jews or the Israelites are on their way to the Promised Land, but they're not allowed to enter the Promised Land because of their punishment from sin. So Moses has to lay the hands of wisdom onto Joshua, and Joshua and the children of the Israelites go in to conquer the Promised Land in a series of wars and battles. And they do this with the Ark of the Covenant, and many of you might remember a story about the walls of Jericho, and that the circling of the covenant or the Ark of the Covenant and the walls will come down. That's the conquering of the Promised Land. Later on, people, the children of the Israelites ask for a king, and they're given King Saul. But unfortunately, King Saul is not a very good king. He is unfit to be king. This brings you to the stories of David and Goliath, and King David and his rise. You might remember David fights Goliath because no one else wants to. David wins, and David becomes the king. And under David's rule is when Israel experiences their heyday and their largest amount of territory, and Jerusalem is their capital. And these are great times for the temple. They build a temple under his son, King Solomon, and no longer do they have to carry the Ark of the Covenant around the desert, but yet they can now put it in a temple, and it'll be housed there until the Babylonians came in later and destroyed Jerusalem. But the Ark and the temple will be there for 400 years. This, after King David and Solomon build the temple, and after King Solomon, 10 of those original tribes that I talked about actually secede and move to the north. And this is when Israel gets split into 2, a north and a south, north being Israel, south being Judea or Judah. Those 10 tribes will end up getting lost. History says they were deported by the Assyrians, in 778, I believe, 777, something along those lines. But just know that they're the 10 lost tribes. They don't come back into play into the New Testament. Although they are talked about, they are lost when Jesus is born. The only ones that are still in play when Jesus is born is the Levite tribe and the Judah tribe. All in all, the history of the Old Testament is a series after Solomon, is a series of kings, of bad kings, of sin, and prophets complaining that God's wrath is coming, and they kill the prophets. So this sin prevails in this Old Testament, as I said before. The roles of the Old Testament should be noted because they are still talked about in the New Testament, and that's the role of the kings, or the people who ruled the people, or the person who ruled the people or the ruler had to come from the Judah tribe, that going back to Jacob's tribe. The priests and the Levites, the people who took care of the sacrifices and the atonement and the temple and the ark, they had to come from the Levite tribe. And while the prophets don't specifically have a tribe, they're the messengers of God. And throughout the Old Testament, these three roles all end up fighting, and it's most of the time that they kill the prophets, the messengers of God. They're the ones that get slain the most, and you'll see Jesus talks about that in the New Testament, the killing of the prophets. Some other things to note that I didn't really mention that you, if you know your Bible history, the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. I'm going to talk about that in the next lecture. And they go into they're exiled from Jerusalem, and they have to go into captivity. And these years are called the years of captivity. And you get the stories of Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon, and Daniel. That story comes from those captivities. But again, most of those stories really don't have a lot to do with Christianity and Jesus. They do. Daniel has some prophecy stories in it about the Maccabean revolt, about Alexander the Great, but not Christian related.